It was a quiet morning in April 1997. Greg and Kimberly Mallory packed their fishing gear, their baby girl in tow, ready for a day of tranquility under the Florida sun. They were headed to the South Florida sod farm, a remote location far from the chaos of everyday life. But what was supposed to be a peaceful escape became something else entirely. Hours later, a harrowing scene would shock a small community and forever change the lives of everyone involved. What unfolded at that desolate farm? Who was responsible for the horror that lay in wait? And how did a young family's pursuit of serenity end in such an imaginable tragedy? This is the story of a crime that refuses to be forgotten. Greg and Kimberly Mallory were an ordinary couple living in Florida, known for their love of the outdoors and their dedication to their baby girl, just shy of 2 years old. On April 6, 1997, they embarked on what seemed like a routine fishing trip to a quiet, remote sod farm in Charlotte County. Hours later, their bodies were discovered in the same location, bludgeoned, shot, and left for dead. Their toddler was found alive but barely clinging to safety, exposed to the elements and covered in her mother's blood. At the center of the storm, James Ford, a man whose name would soon become synonymous with terror. Ford, convicted of murder, sexual battery, and child abuse, would face the death penalty for the atrocities he committed that day. Over the next hour, we'll unravel the events leading up to this tragedy, uncover the evidence that brought Ford to justice, and explore the profound impact this case left on a community and beyond. From the Mallory's final hours to Ford's eventual death warrant, this is a story of loss, justice, and unanswered questions. Stay with us as we journey through the haunting details of the James Ford case. Greg and Kimberly Mallory were the kind of couple that made an impression on everyone who met them. Greg, 31, Kimberly, just 28, was described as a devoted mother, always putting her young daughter first, focused on raising their toddler, who had just begun to form words and explore the world with wide-eyed curiosity. That Sunday morning, April 6, 1997, started like any other. Greg and Kimberly packed up their truck, loaded with fishing rods, snacks, and essentials for a day outdoors. Their baby girl was securely placed in her car seat, her favorite toy clutched in her tiny hands. They headed out with the kind of optimism that comes with spending quality time together, away from the demands of everyday life. Their destination was the South Florida sod farm, known for its expansive green fields and isolated fishing ponds. The farm was a favorite spot for locals seeking tranquility, but the very remoteness that attracted families like the Mallarys would soon become a defining feature of the horror to come. Situated miles from the nearest town, the sod farm was surrounded by dense brush and winding dirt roads. To the untrained eye, it appeared peaceful, untouched by the outside world. But to those familiar with its geography, it was a place where sound traveled poorly, and the sheer isolation could mask anything laughter, whispers, or screams. The Mallarys parked their truck near one of the ponds, excited for a day of fishing under the clear Florida sky. They likely laughed, talked, and soaked in the serenity of their surroundings. As their baby sat nearby, giggling in her stroller, it seemed like just another beautiful day. But somewhere in the distance, someone else was watching, someone who didn't belong there. What happened next remains partially shrouded in mystery, pieced together only through evidence and the haunting aftermath discovered the next morning. The fishing rods remained untouched, the packed snacks were never opened, and Greg and Kimberly Mallory would never return home. In the hours that followed, the Mallarys' peaceful outing turned into a scene of unimaginable violence. The evidence left behind would tell a story of desperation, brutality, and a young life caught in the crossfire. What happened to Greg and Kimberly, and how did their paths cross with James Ford? Let's examine the chilling details of that fateful day. April 7, 1997, the sun had barely risen when a farm worker arrived at the South Florida sod farm, ready for another routine day. As he approached one of the more remote fishing ponds, something unusual caught his eye. A truck, abandoned and eerily still. What he discovered next would haunt him forever. Lying near the truck, partially obscured by brush, were the bodies of Greg and Kimberly Mownery. Greg was slumped against the side of the vehicle, his body showing clear signs of blunt force trauma. Kimberly lay a short distance away, her clothing disheveled, and her body riddled with similar injuries. It was immediately clear that both had been victims of a violent attack, their lives cut short in a brutal and deliberate manner. Inside the truck's cab, their 22-month-old daughter was found alive, but barely. She had spent over 18 hours alone, exposed to the Florida heat, dehydrated, and covered in her mother's blood. Her cries were faint, her tiny body weak, but she had survived. The first responders who arrived at the scene were seasoned professionals, accustomed to dealing with emergencies. But nothing could prepare them for this. The sight of a toddler, orphaned and clinging to life amid the aftermath of such a heinous crime, brought even the most stoic officers to tears. The news spread quickly through the tight-knit community of Charlotte County. People were horrified, unable to comprehend how such violence could shatter the lives of an innocent family. For many, the Mownerys represented a sense of normalcy and everyday family torn apart by something almost too horrific to imagine. Piecing together the events of that fateful day, investigators relied on evidence found at the scene and forensic analysis. The timeline that emerged painted a picture of unimaginable brutality. Sometime after arriving at the sod farm, Greg and Kimberly encountered James Ford. Whether by chance or intent, Ford approached the couple with a weapon in hand. The attack began swiftly and violently. Greg was struck multiple times with a blunt object before being shot at close range, his injuries suggesting he had tried to defend himself against his attacker. Kimberly endured a far more harrowing ordeal. Evidence revealed that she had been bludgeoned, shot, and sexually assaulted. The sheer savagery of the attack spoke to a level of depravity that left investigators shaken. Her body was found near the truck, a haunting reminder of her final moments, likely spent trying to protect her child. Despite the horror inflicted on her parents, the Mownery's daughter had been spared physical harm. Left alone in the truck for hours, she bore silent witness to the violence that unfolded around her. Investigators later speculated that Ford abandoned the scene in haste, leaving the child behind in a grim twist of fate. The brutality of the crime was matched only by the profound sorrow left in its wake. For the people of Charlotte County, this was more than just a crime. It was an assault on the very fabric of their community. How could such a thing happen here? Who was this man capable of such monstrous acts? And most importantly, would justice be served? The answers to these questions would come in the weeks and months that followed. With a grieving community demanding justice, law enforcement worked tirelessly to track down the person responsible. As evidence began to surface, one name would emerge: James Ford. But what was his motive, and how did he leave a trail of clues that would lead directly to his conviction? The investigation would reveal everything. With the Mownery family shattered and the community in shock, law enforcement wasted no time launching an intense investigation. The scene at the South Florida sod farm offered a grim array of clues: the blooded bodies of Greg and Kimberly Mownery, signs of a violent struggle, and forensic evidence scattered across the remote property. For investigators, this wasn't just a crime to solve. It was a race against time to ensure no one else would fall victim to the perpetrator. The first major breakthrough came from the physical evidence left at the scene. The presence of a distinctive set of footprints near the victim suggested the movements of the assailant. A partial fingerprint recovered from the Mownery's truck hinted at someone who may have entered the vehicle. However, it was the forensic analysis of DNA evidence that would eventually steer the case in a definitive direction. Biological samples collected from Kimberly's body confirmed that she had been assaulted, and these samples contained a DNA profile that did not belong to her husband. It was a match to an unknown individual, someone who had left behind a piece of themselves in their crime. Asterisk. As the investigation progressed, detectives began canvassing nearby areas, questioning locals, and following every lead. It was during this process that James Ford's name surfaced. Ford, a drifter with a troubled past and a record of violence, had been seen in the area around the time of the murders. Witness accounts placed Ford near the sod farm on the morning of April 6, raising suspicions. He was known for erratic behavior and had prior run-ins with law enforcement, including charges of assault. But it wasn't just his history that implicated him, it was the mounting forensic evidence that linked him directly to the scene. Asterisk. The DNA recovered from Kimberly's body was run through the state's criminal database. When the results came back, they pointed to one man, James Ford. His DNA was already on file from prior offenses, and the match was indisputable. Investigators also discovered other damning pieces of evidence. Fibers found on the Mouneries, clothing matched items recovered from Ford's belongings, the partial fingerprint on the truck. It was his. A witness even recalled seeing Ford hitchhiking near the area later that day, his clothes disheveled and stained. All signs pointed to Ford, but there was one question that remained unanswered. Why? What drove this man to commit such an unthinkable act of violence against an innocent family? Asterisk. Armed with overwhelming evidence, law enforcement arrested James Ford, charging him with the murders of Greg and Kimberly Mounery, as well as the assault and abandonment of their child. The community felt a sense of relief, knowing the man responsible was in custody. But the story doesn't end here. What happened in court would determine Ford's fate forever. As prosecutors built their case and the defense attempted to poke holes in the evidence, the trial would become a battleground for justice, and the final verdict, it would send shockwaves through the state of Florida. Stay with us as we delve into the courtroom drama and the ultimate resolution of this tragic case. Asterisk. In the months following his arrest, James Ford faced charges of first-degree murder, sexual battery, and child abuse. The trial, held in Charlotte County, would be one of the most closely watched cases in Florida's history. For the Mounery family, it was a chance to seek justice. For the prosecution, it was a battle to ensure Ford would never harm another soul again. The courtroom was filled with reporters, grieving loved ones, and a community desperate for answers. Every seat was taken as the trial began, with emotions running high and tensions palpable. Prosecutors opened their case with a chilling recount of the events of April 6, 1997, painting a vivid picture of the horror that unfolded that day. Asterisk. The prosecution called several key witnesses to the stand, each one adding another layer to the case against Ford. First came the forensic experts, whose analysis provided the backbone of the evidence. They described how DNA samples taken from Kimberly's body matched James Ford with near certainty, eliminating any doubt about his presence at the scene. Fiber and fingerprint analysis further tied Ford to the Mouneries, truck, and clothing. Next, law enforcement officers recounted the painstaking investigation, detailing how they followed a trail of clues that led them to Ford. They described the meticulous work of piecing together the evidence and the relief of finally making an arrest. Perhaps the most emotional moments came when members of the Mounery family took the stand. Greg's brother and Kimberly's parents spoke about the devastating loss and the pain of knowing their loved ones' final moments were filled with terror. Their words moved many in the courtroom to tears, serving as a stark reminder of the human cost of Ford's actions. Ford's defense team argued that the evidence was circumstantial, claiming there was no direct proof that Ford had committed the murders. They suggested alternate theories, implying the possibility of another perpetrator. However, the prosecution systematically dismantled these arguments. The DNA evidence, they emphasized, was incontrovertible. The fibers and fingerprints were impossible to explain away, and Ford's behavior leading up to and after the crime painted a clear picture of guilt. When Ford chose not to take the stand in his defense, it only strengthened the prosecution's case. After weeks of testimony and days of deliberation, the jury reached its decision on all counts to charges of first-degree murder, one charge of sexual battery, and one charge of child abuse. James Ford was found guilty. The courtroom fell silent as the verdict was read. Family members of the Mownerys wept quietly, their grief mixed with a sense of justice finally served. Following the guilty verdict, the sentencing phase began. Prosecutors sought the death penalty, arguing that the brutality of the crime and the innocence of the victims warranted the harshest punishment. They reminded the jury of the 22-month-old child left alone in the truck, a heartbreaking symbol of the horror Ford inflicted on the Mownery family. The defense argued for leniency, citing Ford's troubled past and alleged mental health struggles. But the jury was unanimous. James Ford was sentenced to death for the murders of Greg and Kimberly Mownery, a decision that reflected the severity of his crimes. With the death penalty handed down, Ford's fate was sealed. The Mownery family had found a measure of justice, but the scars left by his actions would remain forever. Yet, as the story seemed to reach its conclusion, the echoes of that day in 1997 continued to ripple through the years. Ford's name would resurface decades later, when Florida set his execution date, a final chapter in a case that had haunted the state for nearly 3 decades. What were James Ford's final words before facing the ultimate punishment? How did the families and the community react to the news of his execution date? Join us as we uncover the final chapter of this haunting case. The trial may have ended with a guilty verdict, but the pain endured by the Mownery family was far from over. For Greg and Kimberly's loved ones, the loss was a wound that would never fully heal. Their young daughter, now an adult, grew up with only fragmented memories of her parents and the knowledge that she had survived a tragedy that claimed their lives. The community of Charlotte County also bore the weight of the crime. The once quiet town became synonymous with the Mownery murders, a dark chapter that left many residents uneasy. Local leaders worked to ensure the safety of public spaces, but the shadow of what happened at the South Florida sod farm lingered for years. Vigil services were held annually in honor of Greg and Kimberly, as the community rallied around their surviving daughter, offering support and love in every way they could. For James Ford, the guilty verdict marked the beginning of a long and drawn-out legal process. As is customary in capital cases, Ford filed multiple appeals, seeking to overturn his conviction and sentence. His legal team argued procedural errors, the reliability of forensic evidence, and claimed that Ford's mental health should have been given greater consideration during sentencing. These appeals delayed the execution for decades, frustrating the Mownery family, who were forced to relive their grief each time the case resurfaced. The delays also stirred debate about the death penalty itself, with some arguing it failed to deliver timely justice in cases as clear-cut as Ford's. For others, the delays were seen as necessary safeguards in a flawed system, ensuring no stone was left unturned. After years of legal battles, James Ford's case took a decisive turn in January 2025. Florida Governor Ron DeSantis signed Ford's death warrant, setting an execution date for February 13, 2025. For the Mownery family, the announcement was bittersweet. While it represented the long-awaited conclusion to a decades-long ordeal, it also reopened old wounds. Governor DeSantis, known for his strong stance on capital punishment, emphasized the importance of justice for the victims and their families. In a press statement, he described the crime as one of the most heinous acts in Florida's history and affirmed his commitment to ensuring that Ford faced the consequences of his actions. Asterisk, asterisk, as the date of Ford's execution approaches, the state prepares for the first scheduled execution of 2025. Outside Florida State Prison, opinions remain divided. Advocates for the death penalty see it as a necessary conclusion to a case that has haunted the state for nearly 3 decades. Opponents argue that no act of violence, no matter how heinous, should be met with another. For the Mallory family, February 13th will mark the end of a long and painful chapter. But it is not a day of celebration. It is a day to remember Greg and Kimberly, a devoted couple, loving parents, and victims of a crime so senseless and brutal that it left a scar on everyone it touched. James Ford's execution will close the book on the Mallory murders, but the legacy of this case serves as a chilling reminder of how quickly peace can be shattered and how a community's resilience can endure in the face of unthinkable tragedy. Asterisk. This is more than a story of justice, it's a story of loss, resilience, and the long road to closure. Thank you for watching, and let us know your thoughts on this case in the comments below. How do we balance justice and humanity in the wake of such devastating crimes? Share your perspective